Hello and welcome to the Christmas edition of HCP TV. Indeed, the very last episode that we're bringing you in the year 2020. But this is a special episode as today is the first anniversary of the death of Brother Michael. In our episode today, we're going to be hearing from people who knew him very well. And where better to start than Brother Michael's brother, Peter, who's going to be sharing his memories and stories with us today.
It's just a year since Michael died, and I have many memories of him, of course. Now, HCPT have asked me to share some of them with you, and of course I'm very happy to do that. The first thing that I would say is that Michael was the most wonderful brother to me. Through all life's ups and downs and twists and turns, he was always there. He'd always listen to me very attentively and help in any possible way he could. I owe him a great debt for that point of view. I mentioned listening, but let me just read something to you that his abbot said about him. He said, "Michael was a great listener with a genuine interest in people, so many people, and yet only you were important to him. When he listened to you, it was to you and only you who were important to him." Moving on from there, I think possibly the next thing to mention is Michael's determination to achieve perfection, almost at any cost. And I think it was this that was behind his decision to become a monk, embracing a life of real hardship in the service of other people, instead of progressing to a normal retirement and old age. On a slightly lighter note, I remember Christmas in the old days when we used to have our parcels laid out on the chairs and sofas, and you could always tell which parcels Michael had wrapped up because they were by far the neatest. There was no contest as far as that was concerned. And then, of course, there were the prayer cards that he produced and bookmarks. They were the work of hours of careful thought and prayer and study. And the end result was something that he really worked hard at and was absolutely determined that they should be as good as they possibly could be. But I don't want to give the impression that Michael's life was completely devoid of enjoyment and fun. On the contrary, he loved a joke. He was never short of a story, particularly if it was over a glass of wine or a glass of whiskey. And I think a great quality Michael had was that if Michael was in the room, if you were in his company, you couldn't be depressed. It was just a marvellous quality that he had. Now, unfortunately, he suffered a lot during the last few months of his life. He could hardly sleep at all. His sight was very poor, and his hearing was very poor as well. But if anyone contacted him, immediately he would be in their presence and in their company, and he would be attentive to them. Above all, Michael loved being with people either in person or on the phone. That was his greatest joy. Now, I miss him terribly. Clearly, obviously, I do. But in a way, I feel he hasn't left us, that he's still with us. And I'm going to quote again from one of the bookmarks that Michael produced. He says, "Dear Lord, like the living flame of a candle, may your love burn within me always. Stay with me, and then I shall begin to shine as you shine, as a light to others, a candle in the dark. Michael is still my candle. He shines for me, and he shines for all of us." Can I wish you every success and happiness in 2021.
Thank you, Peter, for sharing those very personal and special memories you have of Brother Michael, or just Michael to you. We're now going to turn and we're going to hear from Caitlin, who is the Regional Youth Rep for the Welsh region. And she's going to explain a little bit about the last few years of Michael's life when he lived on Caldy Island and then in Nazareth House in Cardiff. And she's also going to pray with us the words of a prayer very, very close to Michael's heart. The prayer cards that Peter mentioned earlier on were an important, as many of us know, way that Michael shared his own spirituality with the trust. So let's hear the prayers.
Brother Michael lived out his last years in Wales, first in the Abbey on Caldy Island, just off the coast of Tenby, and then in Nazareth House in Cardiff. He took an active interest in HCPT's Welsh groups, not least its summer group, who were treated to his wisdom each year before going to Hosanna House. Lord, fill our hearts with your Holy Spirit, to free us from our selfishness, and make us rich in love for you and one another.
Thank you, Caitlin. It was so lovely to hear those words that Michael himself shared with us on many occasions, both in Lourdes and on various recordings that he made for us over the years, very close to his heart and to ours as well. We're now going to hear from Phil Sparke, HCPT's Chief Executive, as he tells us of his memory a year ago when he and Ian O'Brien, Chair of the Board of Trustees, decided to go and visit Michael. They didn't know it would be the last visit they'd have, but they were really pleased they went, and Phil's now going to share some of those memories.
Hello. I thought I would share two memories of Michael, one from relatively recently and one from a little bit further back. Last year, on the 23rd of December, Ian O'Brien and I visited Michael in Nazareth House, and we were hugely privileged to spend some quality time with him at his bedside, where we were joined by Tony Mills, who had supported Michael so wonderfully during his time in Cardiff. We shared quite a few recollections, and we had quite a few laughs, both from us and also from Michael. Then as we left, we informed Michael that over the festive period we would be including him in a prayer wheel. He looked up, with that wonderful glint in his eye which never left him, and told us to turbocharge that prayer wheel. They were the last words I heard him say, and they were said with that eternally cheeky grin, which I will never forget. The other memory comes from a little bit further back, when I was walking with Michael past the gate of the monks' enclosure in Caldy Abbey. I had recently moved from being a volunteer to joining the staff, and I was keen to look at HCPT from other perspectives, keen to find the best way to describe it and to promote it to other people. So I asked Michael how HCPT could best be described. I won't try and impersonate him, but I can hear his voice even now. He stopped, he turned to me, and he said, "It's very simple. It's a pilgrimage based on giving." And to me that encapsulated the very essence of HCPT, and it's a phrase I've often used and still use to this day. Michael lived a life based on giving to us through the grace of God, so that we can pass on those gifts to others. I have no doubt that his life will continue to inspire very many, for very many years to come. May he rest in peace.
Thank you, Phil, for sharing those very special and unique memories from a year ago. We're now going to turn and hear from Colin Bentley, who featured in the last episode of HCP TV. But this time, he's just going to talk to us about the amazing portrait he is doing of Brother Michael, and how, when he went to visit him, the special moment when Michael saw it in progress.
Hello, my name's Colin Bentley. I'm the artist who's working on the project Pilgrimage, a Portrait of HCPT. I'm also a deputy group leader for Group 141. So, this painting behind me, I'm sure many of you will recognise, it's a portrait of Brother Michael. Now, I've been working on this painting, it's not finished yet. I've been working on this painting for about 2 years now. It's the longest I've ever worked on a painting continuously, and it's developed over the time. Now, I was very lucky, very, very lucky indeed to meet Brother Michael the year that he passed away, and I managed to show him the project, the art project, in very early days. It was all sort of, we had a few paintings, and we had his portrait, which was incredibly early stages. Now, I can remember going over to Cardiff, going to the care home and meeting Brother Michael, and he was so enthusiastic about the project. He filled me with massive enthusiasm, which is still there now, without any doubt. And I can remember showing Brother Michael the portrait. It was only half done. His hair wasn't done, same as now. I still need to do his hair. And I can remember he held it. And I was quite nervous. He's incredibly nervous when you show somebody a portrait. And Brother Michael is a man who's affected my life massively, without any doubt. My wife's as well. With HCPT, it's a big thing, painting a portrait like this. So I got the painting out for Brother Michael, and he can't see particularly well. So he was sitting in his little chair, and he held up the painting like this, held it right in front of him. It seemed ages and ages he's holding this painting in front of him. And I looked at my wife, and we were both sitting there thinking, I hope he likes it, because I wanted his blessing for the project. I really wanted that. I wanted him to sort of give that blessing. And after a while, the painting came down, head popped up, and he went, "That's me," which was wonderful, a massive relief. And I can remember saying to him that I haven't finished his hair, and he said, "Well, there's not much of it," which is the same as mine. So it was a wonderful conversation. It was great to meet him, and he loved it. He absolutely loved the portrait, which was in very early days, barely done. As you can see behind me, the portrait here, I'm still working on it. This area is starting to get to where I want it. I want this to be one of the best portraits I've ever painted. There's no doubt about that. That's why I keep pushing it and pushing it and pushing it. I thought I'd finished at Easter. But the trouble is, lockdown and painting all the HCPT portraits has made me get better. So I've reworked on the Brother Michael portrait, and it's starting to get there. I've still got the hair and the outside round the edge of the face there to do. But the thing that I like about this portrait, and it was quite a difficult photograph to paint from. So it's been hard. It's been one of the hardest portraits I've had. But the thing I like about the portrait is it's quiet. It's quite small. It's quite humble for somebody who has achieved so much. The legacy is so large. This is quite a small portrait. So it's quite humble. The eyes are totally engaging. They're soft, they're gentle, they're full of wisdom. And they engage with the viewer instantly. And that's what I wanted with this portrait. I wanted a portrait of the man. I didn't want an enormous ceremonial portrait him on the usual thing you have when people sitting on enormous chairs and everything. Originally I thought I'll put all Lords behind him, I'll put all HCPT, it'll be full of colour, it'll be enormous portrait. No. I think this small, humble portrait that will hang in the exhibition as a tiny little rectangle, just about life size, just slightly bigger than the other portraits of the children and the adults. It will hang there quietly looking over the exhibition. Recently, I quite badly broke my leg about 3 months ago, and I did it in Wales, came back and sort of had 2 weeks in this world of pain. It was quite horrible, really. But the only way I could live in my house was to sleep in the studio. And I had 2 weeks of quite nasty, like I said, quite nasty pain. One of the things that kept me going was this portrait in the studio was hanging on the wall, just at the foot of my little makeshift bed, and also all the portraits of the children. And it didn't matter how bad it got in the middle of the night when I couldn't sleep. And there were some very dark times at night when you can't sleep and you're in pain. I could look at the portraits of the children and look at Brother Michael, and he'd definitely been a big influence in my studio this year as I've been sitting here quietly. So he's almost become a friend in the studio, and I'm going to work on him again in a minute. and slowly developed the portrait. I'm immensely proud of it. So there you go, a portrait of Brother Michael, and hopefully you'll all be able to see it in the flesh soon. Thank you.
Thank you, Colin, for sharing with us once again, and especially for sharing your inspiration behind why you are painting the amazing portrait of Brother Michael. And I'm sure, like many, many other people in the HCPT family, we can't wait to see the finished result. Now for a moment of prayer, or indeed a hymn of praise. Rachel from the Northeast region, who has sung for us on many, many occasions for the Trust, she's going to sing Be Still for the Presence of the Lord, Brother Michael's favourite hymn.
Be still for the presence of the Lord, the Holy One is here. Come bow before Him now with reverence and fear. In Him no sin is found. We stand on holy ground. Be still for the presence of the Lord, the Holy One is here. Be still for the glory of the Lord is shining all around. He burns with holy fire, with splendor He is crowned. How awesome is the sight! Our radiant King of light. Be still, for the glory of the Lord is shining all around. Be still, for the power of the Lord is moving in this place. He comes to cleanse and heal, to minister His grace. No work too hard for Him. In faith receive from Him. Be still, for the power of the Lord is moving in this place.
Thank you, Rachel, for sharing that beautiful version of the wonderful hymn, Be Still for the Presence of the Lord. I remember when we were preparing for the 60th anniversary celebrations for HCPT in Lourdes, and myself and Caroline Bennett, who was pilgrimage director at the time, went to visit Brother Michael to get the seal of approval on all our plans. He listened to everything we had to say, and at the very end, he just said, I just have one thought. And that thought was that after communion, we should have a reflection that was, Be Still for the Presence of the Lord. And it was only at that point that I realised how special that song, that hymn was to him. And certainly it has remained in my heart to this day as well. And now for the final contribution to this edition of HCP TV. We're going to go to Reverend Dave Turner, lifelong friend, colleague, supporter and helper of Brother Michael, or Doc as he refers to him. Dave's got so many stories, and here he is just sharing a few of them with us today.
It's not until you have a quiet moment of reflection that it dawns on you how massive a part Lourdes plays in our lives. Somebody remarked how, in their experience, Lourdes was the holiest place on earth. I'm honoured to say that Brother Michael was a rich part of my life and a personal friend of our little family. My HCPT journey began as a youth, innocently taking part on a sponsored walk for HCPT. It was organised by our parish in Crawley some 50 years ago. Up to that point, I'd had a huge bypass on HCPT. It meant absolutely nothing to me. Having said that, I was a volunteer with the St John's Ambulance Brigade, and I have a vague memory of helping children in wheelchairs onto planes at Gatwick one Easter. I was told that it was their annual pilgrimage or their annual trip to Lourdes. I can distinctly remember actually meeting a disabled boy. I pushed him in his wheelchair right up to his seat, and he was telling me what he was going to get up to for the week. I had an urge to go with this remarkable young man. I felt I was missing out on something. I was secretly hoping to get locked in as the plane started to taxi up the runway, but it didn't happen. But I'd been exposed to HCPT, I think, then, when they were probably a part of the annual schools pilgrimage. And do you know what? I might even have met my first group leader. I think that later on in life I was to meet this young man, but do you know what? I never joined the dots. It's only on reflecting, thinking back. But for me, those people on that aircraft clearly had something. So then, how did I become to be associated with our very own Brother Michael? I've often remarked that the best things in my life have come through the church or through my faith. Growing up in Crawley was a Franciscan parish, and one of the young brothers there said that he was going to start up a little youth group, and we were going to start visiting children at Chailey Heritage in Sussex, just on Sunday afternoons to go and play with them. But the big picture was that we would become volunteers at a new venture called the Leyden House Trust. It was a holiday home for children from Chailey Heritage, so that some of them could have experience of living in a real house. And it had been bought by one of their doctors, and who I came to learn was, in fact, Dr. Michael Strode. Initially, some of our group did become helpers, and while the children were on school holidays, and then weekends was the only time we could get there. But Dr. Michael would often visit there. Well, he did more than visit. He would act as a helper, and he would stay with us as well. He'd muck in with us, got his hands dirty, and the children obviously they had something. They just loved him. They just simply called him Doc, and to this day, me and my family, we still call him Doc. Even when he became a monk on Caldy, I still called him Doc. Calling him Michael or Brother Michael, it just didn't seem right to me. And Doc it was. He didn't mind. But more importantly, when we were staying at Leyden House, Doc would take his little army of volunteers down the pub by means of a thank you. So I got to know Doc, Brother Michael, through the eyes of his young children, but he also took an interest in our lives too. He made sure all the Catholics got to Mass on Sunday. In fact, he'd scoop us up in a minibus, and all the young children as well who happened to be Catholics. And then, but the treat was to stop off at the King's Head on the way home just before lunch. So this was strong currency and kudos amongst the Catholic children. I was very involved with Leyden House before I came to understand the significance of HCPT, Michael Strode's other charity. The Army of Volunteers had that I'd come to meet at Leyden. I got to understand that they too were something part of HCPT, because we were all probably students. I was an apprentice, so we were all the same age, either at college or university. And of course, some of the group leaders had heard of Brother Michael's or Dr. Michael's new venture, so they had an army of helpers that they could call upon. And one of those, and even those group leaders used to stay at Leyden House, which is how I came to know Pat Hall and Marilyn. And by osmosis, I actually became a volunteer in Pat's Group 14. But I'm not alone in saying that Lourdes is a life-changing experience. And of course, the group's doctor was, in fact, Michael Strode. So as a 19-year-old, I had no idea that I was mixing with HCPT royalty. I hadn't grasped the big picture. But I did a straight run. with HCPT from about 1972 to 1982. And by 1982, I actually took the Leyden House family as a group. We were bolted on to the HCPT Easter pilgrimage. In 1980, Barbara and I were married, my very best friend. And as Barbara was indeed an original Leyden House helper, but significantly, she was already a helper with HCPT. And it was through her Lourdes stories, I thought to myself, I need some of that. So someone had a word with Doc, Michael Strode, who on my behalf must have had a word with Pat Hall, and next minute, I'm in group 14. Incidentally, my first fare was about £7. Anyway, in between all of this, even before Barb and I had realised that we were destined for each other, in 1979, Doc took a little group of young children in a minibus all the way from East Sussex to Caldy Island for a wonderful beach holiday for a whole week where we stayed in the guest house. And so I was able to go along as a helper and at the same time share the driving with Doc, because just he and I were the drivers. And the following year, Barb and I had our own honeymoon in that very same guest house, all arranged by Michael. Barbara's last time in Lourdes was in fact with Group 14, just months before the birth of our first child. So is it any wonder that HCPT is in our children's DNA? Because Doc didn't live too far away from us, because I live in Haywards Heath, just about 5 miles up the road. He would visit us from time to time, sometimes on Leyden House business, because I got more and more involved with Leyden House. But occasionally he would come round and just simply use us as a sounding board, and he would confide in Barbara and myself with sometimes some personal things. But so our children were used to Doc popping in from time to time, especially at birthdays. I've got a lovely photograph of him surrounded by children, and there is Doc in the middle of them, stitching a limb back onto a much-loved soft toy. They were all very concerned, taking an interest. In fact, one of the children even managed to rustle up a nurse's uniform. And she did, in fact, become a nurse in real life as she grew up, and actually became a nurse with Group 71. Which is the other group I got involved in, Group 71. We had a parish priest in Crawley. Haywards Heath. No, he was a curate, actually. And he was the chaplain to Group 71, a Brighton-based group. And I came to learn through him that they were looking for more helpers. So I kind of had a quick word with Barbara and said, look, can I go along? Can I, with a view to starting up possibly a support group, which it just didn't happen. I started in 1999, Group 71, and have been with that group ever since. Of significance was the Trust Mass, though, because by that time now, my last experience was in 1982, some 19, nearly 20 years later, the Trust Mass was on steroids. But significantly at that Mass, there was a prayer for vocations. And I'd already been exploring perhaps a vocation, according to the permanent diaconate a number of years back, but I was told to wait. But significantly, in 1999, there was a prayer at that Trust Mass for vocations. And so that really twanged a nerve. And so by 2008, I started my formation. And I was ordained in 2011. As we develop, we do question our faith. As a 19-year-old, I remember saying at Lourdes and Bernadette has made my faith real for me, which is why my parish priest, when I was preparing for my ordination, suggested I might like to include St. Bernadette in the Litany of Saints, asking for their intercession. Our family were a part of the HCPT family that was present on Caldy Island when Doc became a monk, when he made his final profession. We were very honoured to be there. I will often get calls from him from the island from time to time. And when I confided in him that I was discerning a vocation to the diaconate, he said, straight away, you get my vote, Dave. So I was fortunate that Brother Michael was actually able to come to my ordination, and he presented my stole. Latterly, I've been privileged to be able to take annual retreats to Cordy Island, and was able to spend some time in his company. Doc always had plans. Right up to his death, he had plans for HCPT, which was so close to his heart, as you know. His concern was always for the army of volunteers, the young people, because he would stress, without them, HCPT couldn't exist. When you were in his company, Brother Michael made you the most special person in the world. He had time for you. He would listen to you. Everyone was treated the same. And now we have a patron saint in heaven. What more could we ask for?
Thank you, Dave, for your contribution. And also thank you to Rachel, Colin, Phil, Caitlin, and of course, Peter, for everything you've shared with us today. One day soon, we hope we will all gather in Westminster Cathedral in London, which was the plan when we were to celebrate the life of Michael. But of course, COVID-19 came along and all our plans had to change. But until then, we will keep in touch through things like HCPTV and all the other social media platforms that we have. Thank you for joining us today and looking back at an incredible life in just a few moments. But whoever you are, wherever you are in the world, please remember that, as Deacon Dave said, we have a guardian angel up in heaven praying for us. So let's not forget to pray for him as well. So it just remains for me to wish you all in HCPT a very, very happy Christmas and a prosperous new year. And let's pray for the new year, that we can all stay well and be safe. So from everybody in HCPT, wherever you are, God bless. See you soon.